Many papers you write in college will require you to include quotes from one or more sources. Even if you don't have to do it, integrating a few quotes into your writing can add life and persuasiveness to your arguments. The key is to use quotes to support a point you're trying to make rather than just include them to fill space.
Currently, integration is increasingly needed in the business environment. This need emerges from the efficiency and synergy requirements necessary in a complex and turbulent environment. In other words, integration is needed to facilitate coordination, which is again related to the building of competitive advantage. Historically, what has been used to estimate bats has been photographic estimates, visual estimates, mark recapture estimates, and those have been highly prone to bias. Newer technology, like thermal imaging cameras, is accurate but expensive. So at a time of epic bat mortality due to, for example, the fungal white nose syndrome that's wiping out bats in Canada and the U.S. In the Middle Ages, the design and use of flags were considered a means of identifying social status. Flags were, therefore, the symbols not of nations, but of the nobility. The design of each flag resembled the devices on the noble's coat of arms, and the size of the flags was an indication of how high the owner stood in the nobility. Not a lot is known about how the transportation of goods by water first began. Large cargo boats were being used in some parts of the world up to 5,000 years ago. However, sea trade became more widespread when large sailing boats traveled between ports, carrying spices, perfumes, and objects made by hand. Dolphins, whales, and porpoises are all social animals, but some species are more sociable than others. This depends on the environment because a species adopts the lifestyle most suitable for this. Among dolphins, forming groups makes it easier for them to find food, reproduce, and gain knowledge. They are safer too because dolphins can communicate danger when there are threats around. The beginning of the 21st century will be remembered not for military conflicts or political events, but for a whole new age of globalization, a flattening of the world. The explosion of advanced technologies now means that suddenly knowledge pools and resources have connected all over the planet, leveling the playing field as never before.
Over the centuries, the holiday evolved, and by the 18th century, gift-giving and exchanging handmade cards on Valentine's Day had become common in England. Handmade Valentine's cards made of lace, ribbons, and featuring cupids and hearts eventually spread to the American colonies. The tradition of Valentine's cards did not become widespread in the United States, however, until the 1850s. The definition of a disaster varies by organization. Various entities have different pain thresholds that define when an incident becomes a disaster. A bank, for example, will have different criteria than a poison control hotline. With this fact in mind, any organization should begin the process of implementing first alert and response teams after it has completed a business impact analysis.
A ubiquitous neurotransmitter that carries signals between brain cells, dopamine, among its many functions, is involved in multiple aspects of cognitive processing. The chemical messenger has been extensively studied from the perspective of external cues or deterministic signals. A study found that the research funded by the soft drinks industry had different results from research funded by other sources, and went on to suggest that they may have been biased by the research itself. The whole point of the scientific methods is to ensure the research results are not influenced by the source of funding. Tasmania is a large and relatively sparsely populated island off the south coast of Australia. The island is of particular interest to natural scientists, who go there to research the unique wildlife. Tasmania has, for example, 12 species of bird that are not found anywhere else in the world. The scientists say this is the first documented instance of nectar that attracts a particular animal assistant being produced outside of a nectary. In fact, the observed nectar bleeding might actually be an early system that evolved to include the nectaries found in other plants today. The Roman state was tested almost to destruction by the defeat at Cannae by the Carthaginians led by Hannibal, and according to the historian seismology is the scientific study of earthquakes and the propagation of elastic waves through the Earth or through other planet-like bodies. The field also includes studies of earthquake environmental effects such as tsunamis as well as diverse seismic sources such as volcanic, tectonic, glacial, fluvial, oceanic, atmospheric, and artificial processes such as explosions. A related field that uses geology to infer information regarding past earthquakes is paleoseismology. Over time a split would have appeared in wolf populations, he says, those wolves that feared humans and those that didn't. So this would have facilitated, I think, the domestication process. At which point humans deliberately took wolves as pets. But that domestication process, France says, may have happened more than once, first in the West, in Europe, and again in the Far East, in Asia. It is precisely in observing the intertwinings of success and failure that Chasing the Flame makes its greatest mark. With piercing insight and relentless logic, it reveals the pitfalls of international politics and details an intricate struggle between individual and institution. It haunts us with the poignant truth that even a great man can do only so much to reinvent the world. While blue is one of the most popular colors, it is one of the least appetizing. Blue food is rare in nature. Food researchers say that when humans searched for food, they learned to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue is served to study subjects, they lose appetite. Environment problems caused by hard rock mining involve water pollution by metals themselves, chemicals used in processing, acid drainage, and sediment. Metals and metal-like elements in the ore are toxic and prone to cause trouble by ending up in nearby streams and water tables as a result of mining operations. So, as much as this is a book about the experience of traveling, the contemplation of cities that are vast in scale, and villages that are as remote and strange as anything Westerners are ever likely to encounter, it is also a book that tries to describe another kind of journey. As we progress into the 21st century, communications are becoming faster and faster. Think of the millions of different media images you are bombarded with every day. It is as important now to be able to read and make sense of those images as it has been to be able to read ordinary text. The scientists say this is the first documented instance of nectar that attracts a particular animal assistant being produced outside of a nectary. In fact, the observed nectar bleeding might actually be an early system that evolved to include the nectaries found in other plants today. Prolonged exposure to loud noise alters how the brain processes speech, potentially increasing the difficulty in distinguishing speech sounds, according to neuroscientists. Exposure to intensely loud sounds leads to permanent damage of the hair cells, which act as sound receivers in the ear. Once damaged, the hair cells do not grow back, leading to noise-induced hearing loss. Reserve requirements are the proportions of the deposits that banks must keep on hand and are not allowed to lend out. For example, if the reserve requirement is 10% and you deposit $100 in a bank, the bank can lend $90 of that $100 to someone else. But it is not allowed to lend the remaining $10. The sad truth is that happy sounds are infectious. Now comes research that at least partly explains why. It was published this week in the Journal of Neuroscience. A British research team played various sounds including laughter to people who are having their brains scanned by a functional MRI machine. All the sounds activated the premotor cortical region of the brain, an area preparing facial muscles to move. The power of the sun, wind and sea may soon combine to produce clean-burning hydrogen fuel, according to researchers. A team integrated water purification technology into a new proof-of-concept design for a seawater electrolyzer, which uses an electric current to split apart the hydrogen and oxygen in water molecules. Current research models indicate that climate change associated with increasing levels of greenhouse gases is likely to lead to the soils in the interiors of the major continents drying out. In response to a drying of cropland, people are likely to seek either new sources of irrigation water or new, wetter areas to farm. If we choose desalination of seawater as a possible solution, large amounts of energy will be required. New research provides a solution for the century-and-a-half-old puzzle of why capillary condensation, a fundamentally microscopic phenomenon involving a few molecular layers of water, can be described reasonably well using macroscopic equations and macroscopic characteristics of bulk water. Is it a coincidence or a hidden law of nature?
Scientists studying brain scans of people who were asked to come up with inventive uses for everyday objects found a specific pattern of connectivity that correlated with the most creative responses. Researchers were then able to use that pattern to predict